Thanks very much for returning. Hope you enjoyed the track sessions. And now we are moving on to our almost final agenda item of the day. We still have Ursa's closing remarks and a couple of special announcements. But before we get started on the final panel, I'm joined by a number of key industry players here. I'll introduce them in a moment. Probably some familiar faces. But I wanted to flag that there will be another live in-person VR training session in that networking room. Click the networking button and then join room, starting in 30 minutes. And Friends from Airport College will be running that again. So now on to our closing panel. Panels brought to you by Etihad Airways. Visit www.etihadcargo.com to learn more. It's been said that the best way to predict or design the future is to create it. And that's precisely what our industry panel will be talking about today, designing the future. Joining us today to discuss this exciting topic are Alan Glenn, Vice President, Cargo Development with Menzies Aviation, Randy Chappell, Global Manager, ULD Control with UPS, and Fabio Gamba, Managing Director at the Airport Services Association. The entire logistics industry is facing unprecedented challenges these days, and air cargo is no exception. Indeed, the whole management of freight assets, such as shipping containers and air cargo pallets, has been thrown into sharp focus. So the first question I have for our panel, against this background, what would you see as the primary challenge when it comes to achieving optimal efficiency in ULD operations? Is it a lack of suitable infrastructure, legacy IT systems, other types of technology, lack of training, knowledge, or something else? So very interested to hear your thoughts on that. Why don't we start with you, Randy? You're left on my screen, so let's go with you.
Oh, first. Good. Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to share some time and comments with everyone on the call. That's a very interesting question. I think the primary concern that I would share with the group would revolve around ULD visibility. And that's visibility across the supply chain, not just the airlines on the airplane, but on the tarmac, in the warehouse, and anywhere else the container may go. As far as what those hurdles are that prohibit that at the moment, I mean, so far today we've talked a little bit about making containers smart, the concept of smart containers and some version of tracking devices. But with that kind of technology comes a lot of tech hurdles as well. You have the antenna, various and different kinds of antenna arrays, and then the data sharing that may accompany those devices. If I choose one methodology and another colleague chooses a different platform, then suddenly you have these competing infrastructures that you would have to deploy around the world to get that crisp visibility that we all need to drive efficiency. I do think that there's a counterflow with aging infrastructure of technology at some airlines. I just think that's a fact that we have to move around as best we can and just adapt as quickly as we can. And then finally, from an airline perspective, especially when we're talking about technology affixed to the containers, an airline has the responsibility to make sure that the aircraft and the operation of that aircraft are done safe. Any kind of personal electronic device, and all these trackers in my world are called personal electronic devices, they have to be vetted through our engineering group to make sure that those devices do not interfere with communication or navigation of the aircraft during operation. So the other challenge, if we have several companies doing different things with different solutions to best fit their needs, I have to think about the interlining and the interlining aspects associated with these different technologies within the scope of safe flight, and to make sure that the aircraft takes off and it lands safely in the process. So to me, that's a pretty big responsibility that all the air carriers have, and it's something that we have to figure out. When I accept a container from any airline, how do I know what device it may or may not have on it? How do I know whether or not it's safe with my aircraft? Those are some questions that I think are tech hurdles that we have in that ULD visibility supply chain.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Randy. Fabio, from the airport perspective, airport services.
Yes, good evening, morning, wherever you are, whatever it is where you are. And thanks for the question. I'll take a slightly different perspective. And I would say, I mean, from our perspective, first and foremost, what we've seen in the last 2 years is a surge in demand for cargo in general and ULD. And from our perspective, it's been super efficient. Right? It's been super efficient because in many cases, these operations have allowed ground handling in general to stay, alive and to keep the head out of the water. It's been a life boon, if I may say, for many ground handlers. And so, from that perspective, it's a kind of an interesting question because efficiency was there. Now, and nothing is perfect. We're not living in a perfect world, and of course, you can always try and see, okay, well, next time it happens, or can we continue with the momentum and make sure that we improve this efficiency? And I would say, of course, yes. Is it a technology question? I think you've already heard part of the answer. But again, from my perspective, I would say, I think first and foremost, and it's always, an intriguing question. Sorry, for me, it's the number of stakeholders that you have in the whole cargo process. If you're really paying attention, it is really hard to be super efficient when you have a lot of stakeholders involved. And here you have, quite a lot. You're talking about freight forwarders, you're talking about carriers, you're talking about customers, you're talking about, ground handling agents. You're talking about airports, and of course, with each airport having different logistics, warehouses, configurations, if you will. And so, I guess in order for us to boost the efficiency level, if we want to continue on this momentum, sort of and I'm going to employ a very barbarian term, which actually I don't like that much, but it speaks for itself, in a collaborative decision-making, CDM, which is a term coined mostly and perhaps at the origin for the airports with all their stakeholders, is something, CDM is something that we could possibly want to reconsider from a cargo, perhaps ULD perspective, and give it sort of a specific sense here. Because, as I said, I think if you want to achieve super efficiency, you need to streamline your process, and you need to simplify to the best possible extreme the decision-making process, the discussion process, and so that would sort of involve somehow a sort of a CDM specifically devoted for these operations. I don't know if that makes sense, but I thought that I would share these sort of insights from my own perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, it touches on what Randy started off with, which was how do I know that things that are coming through there through the different stakeholders within the supply chain, movement of cargo into a UPS aircraft. How does he know it's safe and it's not going to cause any problems for them? I'm curious from your perspective, Alan, what are you seeing as the key things that are when it comes to ULD, the challenges are?
It's really interesting because we kind of my previous two panelists have kind of come, the two different streams is we have traditionally been a very conservative industry and slow change, and things have evolved over a long period of time. And we've put together, for example, in the cargo world, my boss Robert Fordry talks about the jigsaw of trying to find the right customers and trying to optimize the warehouse and trying to get that all in place. And in the last 2 years, we threw all that away overnight. That all went out of the window. And, there was some really rapid movement in the industry, quite exciting. When you look at loading cargo in the passenger cabin, we've seen trade flows reverse. We've seen commodities change overnight. We've seen different issues with ULDs being in the wrong place because the trade flows have changed and flights are very full and there's no space to return empties. It's been very interesting. So we're a very conservative industry, but when it puts its mind to it, or when circumstances affect it, can turn on a sixpence. It's really quite amazing sometimes what we actually have. So, it'd be quite normal for me as the ground handler to kind of come in and moan about, the poor ground handler staying in my small hotel room in the centre of London overnight, is how hard it is. But there have been challenges, and we have got many challenges that are in place. I was just reflecting on what our problems are for training and things like that as well. I used to be in charge of training for Menzies, and in our annual report, we're a publicly listed company, and our last published annual report was 2020. 2021 will just come out. 65% staff turnover in 1 year. So 65% staff turnover in 1 year. I know warehouses where that's 120%. So it's really hard to keep any knowledge inside the business. So we have to make things very simple and very easy. And we've got a different generation of staff, and I think they come into our warehouses and they look at it and think is it the dark ages? We would see that ULD receipt. I'm sure we probably do have it in 3 different colours somewhere in the world still. And they're wondering, what is this that we're asking them to do? So I also then get very excited about what I've just seen. It's not this new technology that is available that we need to get there, but we have to somehow wrestle this multi-stakeholder thing and maybe try a few things out. And I think that's the issue, is what things do we think are going to make a difference, and what things can we all back that will help us with the challenges we face? What wins for everybody? And some excellent ideas from ULD Care this year that are actually coming forward. But how do we get them the publicity? How do we get them the traction that they actually deserve? Because the ULD world is a little corner of the industry, but it's really important. And so I think not having the right equipment in place is definitely a problem. Not having contracts that actually reflect having the right equipment in place. There isn't when we do up a contract with an SGHA, with a carrier, it doesn't say, and you will get 4 ship sets of ULDs per airplane. We'll get a variable amount of ship sets per airplane, and we'll be expected to handle them properly. So how do we equate that to get that kind of that balance correct, to be able to handle things correctly? How do we get people trained to make sure they understand what it is they're actually doing, how important it is, what an important role they actually have? And with the trade flow changes, we've seen more intact units going out into industry to deal with congestion problems in many ways, to keep cargo moving, but it's going off into a part of the industry which is highly unregulated and highly untrained, where they're also handling these ULDs and building them up. And so how do we get those people engaged as well through the network? So there are many challenges, but there is also some really exciting things that are actually coming at this time. And sometimes when you're challenged, that's when maybe these things are opportunistic and we need to ride on the back of them.
Yeah, definitely. I take your point. I've heard that in a number of different industries where the pandemic has just pushed changes and innovation and so quickly because people had to adapt. Like, you had to adapt at a speed that we had not experienced before. Going back to you, Randy, just picking up on that theme of that I think all of you have touched on, which is the stakeholders and kind of integrating all the different pieces of the supply chain or of the movement of the ULD anyway, and bringing in all these new things like tracking and knowing where your containers are and being able to use them like the way you're supposed to. So from your perspective, what role does ULD Care have to play in that? I think Alan touched on a couple of initiatives that the association has going, but from your perspective as an airline, what can ULD Care do to advance that integration better?
Well, I tell you, Alan just touched on a big nerve of mine, and that is turnover. I think we've seen turnover just as a huge challenge across the entire supply chain over the past couple of years. Some of it was just folks retiring or moving on as the economy evolves and taking different jobs, maybe with better, a better situation for an individual. I've seen people retire. I've seen all kinds of things put pressure on our work staffs that we have in all of our operations. And I think from a ULD Care perspective, some of the things that we've been hearing about, I hate, the things like training, the things like just making sure that we get a communication platform out there that can be just taken in by the industry, so to speak, so that everyone has the knowledge of what the ULD world is all about. I mean, at the end of the day, knowledge is power when it comes to the ULD and how we handle it, how we inspect it, and how we transfer it around our network. And most certainly the training and the communication aspects of that, if we get that in front of our folks, that's the first thing that we could hope for. And, I had some conversations with Bob Rogers a couple of years ago about what he has taken off with the blockchain portion of what ULD cares about too. I still think that we need that common interface, that safe channel of communication between companies as we hand off equipment. And I think that that's a good platform to further expand out so that, everybody in today's world, unfortunately gets hacked. My email got hacked last year. I had to, recreate some things. And I think that the value of safe communications, of safe and accurate communications through a platform is something that we all can embrace and all use moving forward in the future. So I think that the track that ULD Care is on, both with training and with the blockchain specifically, are ones that are well suited for today's challenges and the challenges we have in the future.
Fabio, from your perspective, I mean, you talked you brought up the idea of the collaborative decision making. I'm not sure if anyone else on the panel is familiar. I'm not really familiar with how that works. Can you help us understand that a little bit? And knowing what you know of ULD Care, is there a role that ULD Care should be playing or could be playing to facilitate that?
Well, I'm not sure I can be more, explanatory or let's say, going deeper into the concept of CDM, because it's quite a complex concept. But basically, it's pretty simple in its overall concept, which is you just bring together all the people and you make sure that whatever decision you make, everyone subscribes to it, everyone understands it, and everyone then implements it at its own level. And what I said was, in that context, to make sure that we can make sure that all the various stakeholders are aligned at the table. And I was saying that because I've been digging around, not only for ULD specifically, perhaps more generally for cargo industry. And it's true that a lot of our members do cargo, right? It's part of their activities. Others don't, but it's certainly, as I said, an activity that is growing in terms of, at least from a ground handling perspective. And so I started to have dialogues with those associations that do matter in terms of cargo, and I was surprised to learn that there are so many, of them. I discussed, we had very interesting discussions lately with Cargo IQ. We also had a very interesting discussion with TIACA. And obviously they are representing cargo from a slightly different perspective, representing, stakeholders X rather than stakeholders Y, but it all contributes to the difficulty in the end when it comes to reaching, the maximum efficiency because there are so many stakeholders. And I was also surprised to hear, and this is no criticism because it's the same everywhere. So don't try and think that I'm putting my or trying to blame that world in particular, because it's certainly not the case. But it's true that I've realized that sometimes these different associations don't talk to each other. They have their own working groups representing their own companies, their own members, and they have excellent ideas. And then suddenly you realize, but there are actually walls between these working groups or these initiatives, and they don't talk to each other. They claim that they are helping the cause because they're helping the freight forwarders, but that would then perhaps be to the detriment of the cargo handling agents, which were not part of the initial thinking, and so on and so forth. And you're like, guys, I mean, still air freight is relatively small business, growing very fast, but in terms of volume, it's still relatively small. So I think we have all that we need at our disposal to make sure that we can keep it, and it's easy said than done, of course, but we can keep it as efficient as possible by going through a CDM or anything related.
Mm-hmm.
Just a word on what the other panelists have brought forward with respect to training. Obviously, training is, I would say, a buzzword these days. For ground handling, we have lost up to 60% of our capacity, employee capacity. I mean, this is a very labor-intensive sector, and when you see that 60% of your skills have gone and are not coming back, you really ask yourself some questions. And they're not coming back for a number of reasons that I think we all know. It's a very tough job, working in very tough conditions, very often at the minimal, salary conditions. And obviously, as soon as you have crashes, so there's this one, you have the big reset, and everyone says, okay, I'm done with that. I'm leaving, irrespective of how long this person has, been in the job. And obviously, it's more painful to see that someone with 20 years of experience is leaving the job rather than someone with only 6 months of experience thinking, well, this is too tough for me. I found something else and I'm leaving. So training is obviously at the heart of our, say, worrying or preoccupations. But I would say even before that, it's the step before. It's how you get to attract Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, whatever you're calling them, in the first place. We are really witnessing here a loss of interest from the new generation into these types of jobs. And that's, to me, that's the major question. How can you then readdress or reconnect with this younger, new generation about the job? And how can you make sure that before you train them, you first have their attention? And perhaps here, the ULD care of this world, and certainly the case for us at ASA, we ought to ask ourselves, if there are things that we could do more than what individual corporate companies can do for themselves. Because one thing obviously is to talk on behalf of company X trying to attract people at this or that station. And perhaps another thing is to try and have a global campaign, pulling all the resources together under the ULD care patronage for that specific example, and try and really reconnect with this younger generation, the young people who have expectations of their own that we as fossils don't perhaps understand, right? I think, to me, this is really where associations such as UAD Care and ASA can make a difference.
Thanks, Fabio. Alan, I saw you nodding your head quite a bit to what Fabio was saying. You're on mute.
Yeah,
still.
no, I very much agree, and I think is the brain drain has been very much apparent. As I mentioned the stats, and it's a little bit worse in 2020, but it's been like that for a lot of years. But I think it's what we did do in the last year is we lost a lot of our experienced staff. There was a core of people that had made this their career, and for whatever reason, they're no longer with us, and I don't think they're coming back. I think a lot of them are not coming back this time, and that is a worry, and so we have to make ourselves more attractive to the next generation. We have to make it more relevant. We have to make it something that is closer to their experience of everything they've seen before, and their world revolves around the phone, being online, doing things with apps. They're much more comfortable in that kind of area. So I think is the audience is waiting for it. Our problem is what's the IT policy to get that app on there? Do I have the right equipment? All those issues that as an organization we have to get over to make these things happen. But what's exciting is with ULD Care is, as an organization, it's investing in them, and it's one of the organizations that does do that, and it brings groups of different parts of the industry together. And I think, I was a board member of Cargo IQ before, and I think that's another industry group which is very interesting. It's forwarders, airlines, ground handlers, people that when that started you wouldn't normally see in a room together, but they did agree on how the cargo flow worked from end to end, and that's been a very useful piece of information. And again, overlaying the ULD journey on top of that, it's part of the MOP. And but how do we make use of this to move forward, and how do we make this meaningful to our staff and make a difference by doing it? And how do we help the industry? There's so much waste in our industry with the stacks and stacks of pallets that are sitting around and never move and never circulate, but they're stockpiled at the wrong end of the earth for long times that we have to have. So there's many challenges that are here, but I think it's what tools do we bring to bear, and how do we get the consensus, because I think consensus is required, on which ones to act on and demonstrate some activity.
Okay, great. Thanks for those. Thanks for those responses. I wanted to shift gears a little bit now. Like I heard that loud and clear. Technology tracking and employee retention training are things that are definitely top of mind for all three of you. Wanted to shift gears a little bit here to talk about something that impacts all of us, and that's sustainability. That's been one of the key topics of discussion for this conference that we've had today. And we've heard stories that there's a fair bit of opportunity to improve sustainability within the different parts of air cargo and even with ULD activity itself. So I'm wondering if each of you could comment on that. If you have, from your perspective, is there any low-hanging fruit when it comes to sustainability? And what role can ULD Care play in trying to promote greater awareness? Why don't we mix it up here a little bit? When I start with you, Fabio, and then we'll go to Alan and then Randy.
Oh, you caught me by surprise.
Sorry, I should try to surprise people.
Good. I guess first you would need to define sustainability. What is it that you mean with that? Because it's sort of a catch-all type of buzzword that can mean pretty much everything and nothing at the same time. And as we know, sustainability is divided into three bits. You have the financial or the economic, you have the social, and then you have the things that are related to emissions and this type of things. I imagine that you're more into the third aspect or third definition of it, right? And it's true if that is the case, and tell me if this is not the case. It's true that there's always the equation that one needs to solve between efficiency on the one hand and sustainability on the other hand. This equation is not an automatic one, because you might want to improve one, but to the detriment of the other. And obviously, recently we don't have the choice anymore. We need to be doing both. you need to increase efficiency, you need to increase your emissions, or you need to decrease your emissions, or to increase the way you're emitting them, and the way you're tracking them, right? It's interesting because we've asked ourselves the same type of questions for quite some time now. And when you mention, hey guys, ASA needs to get out there and have a very strong opinion and voice on sustainability, everyone says, yeah, let's do that. It's super important, obviously. And then when you get a little bit more deep, and you're scratching the surface, and you're asking people, so how exactly, or what exactly would you like us to do? And then you start hearing all sorts of ideas, some of them being excellent, others being a bit more difficult to implement. But it shows that every company has its own idea and has its own agenda, and it's very difficult for. I have a poll coming up on my screen. It's very difficult for people to be able to think with the industrial hat on, and it becomes something which is making things more complicated, because then it becomes a sort of a competition thing. We need to go that direction because we know we have an edge there, and so on and so forth. To make a long story short, I think sustainability is not something that we can opt in or opt out anymore. I think for long enough, we've been able to say, in the end, it's only Scope 1 emissions for the airlines. The airlines now are under scrutiny from the legislator to come up with all sorts of, SAFs and emissions trading schemes and what have you. Even ICAO has come up with its own emissions trading scheme, and that's all perfect. And sort of we can sort of hide behind that because we're only 0.02% of the emissions of airlines. So we are just a very, very small fraction of these emissions. And even if that is true, and that is definitely true, this is not good enough. And so we're now, and probably in 2022 for the first time really seriously, and it's already pretty late, I must say, we are now really mulling over a number of very concrete initiatives with respect to mostly GSEs, the type of GSEs that we're using, the electrification of GSEs. And you're constantly, hitting the same wall, which is it's all fine with the electrification of GSEs, but you have two issues. The first one is who puts the money on it? Because in the end, if your airlines customers are not interested in paying a little bit more for new devices, you're stuck. You're stuck with your electric GSEs, which has costed you more than 15% or 20% per unit compared to gasoline GSEs. And then the second wall that you hit, or you may hit, is it's all good that we have customers ready to pay for it, and hence you are ready to make the investments. But then you still have the airports, which must allow this to happen. They must have the right infrastructure, the right logistics for you to be able to plug in your GSEs and make sure that they're working all the time. So that's quite a complex equation, and we realize that even if we want to have our own voice on sustainability, it's not good enough. We cannot do it in isolation. So we're now seriously mulling over joining existing programs put forward by, for instance, airports, carbon accreditation programs, for instance. But at the same time, making sure that the airports also can do their parts, because us doing in isolation our own stuff won't bring us anywhere. And I would imagine that is exactly the same for ULD Care. They're mulling over, and I know because I've discussed that with Bob, the same type of things, and they're being hit with the same constraints somehow.
Yeah. Alan, over to you. Thoughts on sustainability and low-hanging fruit that you guys see? Or...
I always turn up for any discussion on sustainability, hoping that I'm going to get some ideas which I can implement. Because it's a real challenge, because it's very high up in most corporate frameworks now. We've published some sustainability goals, to be carbon neutral by 2033, which is our 200th anniversary as a company. We want to do these things, and it all sounds great. And all the stuff Fabio has said, we're doing that in the ground handling world. When I put my cargo hat on, and then I look for the opportunities that we have to do so. And yes, electric forklifts and things like that. But, a lot of it is infrastructure, is we're more than happy. And in fact, if we have a business case now and we don't buy an electric forklift, we have to justify why we're not doing it. So we're definitely on that side. But quite often there's a very reasonable situation why you can't do it, because the airport infrastructure can't deal with it. It just doesn't deal with those things very well. So there are some challenges around implementing it. But I think it is very much Fabio says as well, is what can we do together? And I think it's the melding of the ideas, because it needs to make sense that we're chasing the same things, because otherwise we're all doing different things. Again, they're not the priority. What is it we work on in an industry? And I see a lot of industry groups that I'm involved in it are discussing this, is what can we, I think it's becoming real now, whereas I think before it was a talking point and maybe there was a bit of greenwashing. But I'm feeling that people are actually talking about it with some heart and some passion now. And probably because they're beginning to measure things, they're being measured against them. When they're going for an RFP, it's actually, the carriers are becoming very interested in it. And actually, one of my great takeaways from today was some of the statistics on, a ULD and straps and how much energy gets wasted in doing those things. And, that's something that I've got in the back of my head and kind of think that's a really interesting thing. When we talk about some of the KPIs, if we had less ULDs in circulation, that's a lot less aluminium that we're making, and if we got, so we had a great wave. We changed a lot of ULDs. Certainly when I was at Cathay, we did a lot of things to reduce the weight of our ULDs. That happened very quickly. It was an easy business case, but it's looking for that maybe not so easy business case, but one that makes sense. How much money are we wasting by doing this? And it has a very good green benefit. So I'm quite intrigued. That was a really nice kind of thought. I thought, yeah, that's useful. That's something that's actionable, which perhaps people aren't taking any care on. How much plastic, how much metal is wasted by us having single-use straps, as it sometimes feels like in the industry.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's there were some very interesting points that came up. I didn't even sit in on the track on sustainability, but even some of the ideas about pulling together some sort of operation that's going to collect from different parts of the industry and recycle materials. And so I thought that was a very interesting point that looks like ULD Care is pursuing, or at least considering. Over to you, Randy. Thoughts on sustainability?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. First of all, thanks to Fabio and to Alan, because this support group has done me more good than probably anybody else, because I thought I was the only one who had experienced problems with recharging electrified vehicles on airport property. We've certainly had our fair share of attempts at electrification or other alternative fuel sources just on our equipment that would service an aircraft or be around the tarmac. And similar to the other two panelists, when you start talking to the airport authority, they want you to go that direction. But when you tell them that your engineer did the math and they're going to have to turn off all the lights in the passenger terminal for 5 hours a day in order for me to charge my high loaders, they suddenly realize that they're not as prepared to support their own goals as we are. So that's a challenge for us all to work collectively, get out of our silos and work with the airports and with our suppliers in the ground support equipment arena to collectively come up with some solutions. And I wish that was a quick item that we could flip the switch, so to speak. But So far, I haven't seen it. That the when you get into public investment of infrastructure, that that gets out of the control of any one company, and it becomes a public discussion. And with the global economy and the shape it's in right now, yeah, we're doing pretty good from an air cargo perspective around the globe. But I think governmental entities around the world may or may not have as much money as we all may think in order to really invest in increasing the electric grid, as an example, to support some of the initiatives that we all think are important at that point to invest in. From a ULD perspective and sustainability, very first thing that comes to everyone's mind is let's make a lighter container. And that has a direct bearing on fuel burn, and that certainly helps the environment. But unless that container is also durable, you could wind up having 15 more in inventory because that lighter container breaks so often. And then you get in that repair network, and you're suddenly paying to repair that container more frequently, putting more patches on it, it's gaining weight, all those other things. And suddenly that sustainability of that container, there's a delicate balance in my mind between how light it needs to be and how durable it needs to be in order to be most effective in our industry. And I still think that there's a place to look at alternative materials to get away from some of the aluminum components of a container and look at other potential materials that we might be able to build a pallet or container out of. I do think, as an example, we haven't touched very much on shoring material that we all use to build up on pallets with equipment. There's stacks of wood all over the place that everyone uses, and an elegant redesign of a pallet that requires less or no shoring material that is sustainable, that pallet could be reused 100 million times in its 15-year life. We really need to start thinking about how ULD design and how ULDs could evolve in the future to support sustainability, both from a durability perspective and also just the other aspects of cargo buildup. How can we be more efficient at that? So I think that there's certainly room for improvement in that space. I do think that it's something that most all of the manufacturers that build ULD equipment are talking about. I've heard some great things over the past year or so in that space, and I hope that those folks continue down that path. And will it drive prices? I don't know yet. I mean, that's always another challenge with every airline when you want to adopt new technology or new strategies. What's that ROI look like? What's that justification look like to be able to do that? So I do think that there's a lot of good discussion right now. I'd like to see more firm steps from a ULD care perspective. I think, honestly, hosting platforms like this where we could get together and have these discussions and get some alignment with the groups that you see here on this panel with the diverse backgrounds that the three of us have, I think that that's good for everyone to understand. And I hope that through that kind of communication platform, we can all get aligned if we're not, and be saying the same thing when we all visit the airport authority or we all visit the regulator, or when the regulator comes to visit us. Hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what we think. And as we stay aligned as an industry, I think that certainly will keep focus and help us achieve some results.
Just really curious, this might be a little bit of a tangent, Randy, but biofuels for airlines, is that something that's still on the table or making progress, or is it sort of
I think we're on the tarmac between our high loaders and our tugs. I think we're experimenting with like 5 or 6 different fuel sources and 2 or 3 different types of battery technologies in our electrified vehicles. So honestly, I'm not as up to speed on the diverse fuel sources as as I should be.
Yeah, that's okay. It was just one of those things that I see from time to time pop up in the news feeds and things, like talking about biofuels and aviation. So, all right. One more question for you. Actually, we're going to put up another poll question. Poll number 2. Are you optimistic that ULD operations can be improved? And that's going to segue into our well, it captures actually what we've been talking about a fair bit so far today in this session. Switching gears a little bit about the role now, the role that ULD Care can play in bringing different parties together. ULD Care has I've heard this a couple times today, where we have a very, very good focus and are prominent within the niche that we work in. But how do we take it to the next level in terms of engaging with the broader community, positioning as a credible, knowledgeable authority, and starting to bring these different stakeholder groups together? Are there some opportunities that we might be missing or not considering to expand the awareness of ULD Care and the importance of ULD among other? I don't know. Do we look at partnering with other associations, or do we look at being the driving force behind creating some working groups around sustainability or other aspects of air cargo? Question would be basically, do any of you see any low-hanging fruit there? Like, is there something that we could be pulling the trigger on today that would make an impact for the industry and for the association? Alan, why don't you start this time? I've
Sure.
gone to the others first.
I think ULD Care is a well-kept secret, unfortunately, and something that does fabulous work, and it's known to those of us that have gotten involved with it over the years, and we know the work that's actually done. But I think they have a great opportunity at the moment. I think this angle on demurrage is a very interesting chance to maybe get back into the conversation and the broader conversation about what ULD Care does. So I think it's an excellent vehicle to take to the other industry parties to see what ULD Care can actually do, because I think it does reduce waste. I think it's fair. I think it's a very fair and reasonable thing. I think it will help improve circulation of ULDs, and I think it's very much needed in the industry at this time. Having worked in the carrier for a long time, I know where the budget for the ULD sat, and I know where the getting money out of the forwarder sat, and it was two different parts of the carrier, and very different. Salespeople don't want to charge that money, and so. But I think if you get that to the executive part and see that you need to join these two things together, because they're causing you friction, and they're causing you inefficiency, I think is a very, very good thing. And it's a model that's well proven, and it can come there. And I think it's a great vehicle for then bringing through the rest of the work that ULD Care actually does as well, and getting the attention it deserves. But I think this is it's a really different thing. And again, for years and years and years, ULD Care's had the platform, for interlining and sharing all this information, so it's well known for it. This is just taking it to another level, and I think it's a great thing to show some forward thinking and bring parties together. And I think those parties should be IATA and TIACA. I think are very much is the industry groups that you should go for. There's great points for both in this, and I think that's the stakeholders that I think you will bring more people to the table rather than the operational people that are really interested in the ULDs. I think we have to get some of the more of the decision makers involved and interested in what's actually going on.
Great, thank you, Alan. Randy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start echoing what Alan said. I do agree that the ULD demurrage conversation is something that should be expanded on within our industry. I do think that could help drive sustainability as well. I know Bob had some opening comments about the EUCR process, and we've had some internal discussions with that. And it's easy to create an app and sign that, yes, I have your container. But then on the back side of that, if something goes awry with that transaction, then quickly you get to what is the legal basis for the enforceability of that signature? Was the person that signed for that legally responsible and legally capable to sign on behalf of of the company that it represented? And then the whole idea of the GDPR and the personal protections afforded through that law in the EU. Those are all things surrounding that EUCR process that I think we need to ferret through and develop further before we get to the point where we have that convenience that I think we all really want. We all want to be able to get rid of the paper, put a fingerprint or a signature on an iPad or on some kind of a device, and have that work for all of us to help improve that visibility across our supply chain. We need that, but I think there's hurdles yet to be addressed and to ferret through in that process.
And is that something you think ULD Care can take a lead on, working through?
I really do. I think as the discussion unfolds and as things, the short answer is yes. I do believe that that's something in the space of ULD Care that could be certainly beneficial to all of its members.
Thanks, Randy. Fabio?
Well, first of all, I don't think I can qualify my answer more than what the other two panelists have given, because I'm not that much aware of all the initiatives that ULD Care is pursuing at the very moment. And I do have regular conversations with my peers, Bob and Urs, and I sort of know a little bit what's going on there. But one thing that I would say in general, for associations that are of the size of ULD Care, of ASA, or other associations, there's the other one that I'm leading, which is called ACA, Airline Catering Associations. It is always, in the end, that you need to avoid trying to be the be-all and end-all for all your members on all the fronts. You need to pick up your fights, because you cannot afford to be as an IATA or as even a regional association, so there's Airlines for Europe or Airlines for America. These guys have means, these guys have the clout, the weight, the personnel to be pretty much everything to everyone on all the fronts at the same time. We can't afford to do that. And sometimes you need to pick up your fights wisely. They are perhaps not the most long-term oriented, but certainly if you can make sure that they deliver, even though there are tiny, deliverables. But if you can stick to relatively short to mid-term deliverables, tangible deliverables, I think you've already, done two things. First of all, you've made progress, you achieved progress for your membership. And second, you've shown that, thanks to you, there's strength in numbers, and that you can achieve some tangible benefits for the sector. And that to me is really priceless. And that's something that I always try to keep in my mind whenever you have your members saying, oh, we need to do this, or we need to do that, and this and that. And then you're like, oh, guys, oh. Yes, ideally we should, but it's simply not possible. And so now, going back to ULD Care, I don't know what this will be. And I don't have a ready-made answer for that. We've heard a number of ideas proposed by the other two panelists, and I'm sure the answer lies in between somewhere. But I think, as long as you can keep that in mind, that you cannot be the be all and end all for everything to everyone. You need to really pick up your voice wisely, and then you'll make sure that things will unfold naturally. And obviously, sooner or later, Ayatas or the Chiakas or the others of this world will hear about that, and they will need and want to work with you. And so that's the best. That's as far as I can go, right? To say, this is something that I think makes a lot of sense for 10-year associations.
Yeah, that's a very good insight, because there are so many challenges and so many opportunities to work, but what's the priority, and focusing in on the priorities. Well, thanks very much to all of you. Alan Glenn, Vice President, Cargo Development, Menzies Aviation; Randy Chappell, Global Manager, ULD Control, UPS; and Fabio Gamba, Managing Director at Airport Services Association. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your time. I appreciate that very much. We're going to flash up one more poll before we bring Urs into the conversation here, and then we'll move to the closing remarks. So just stand by, everyone. Checking in to see if we can see the polling results from the 3 polls that we've run so far this afternoon. Okay, just waiting for Urs. I think he's got a couple more things to say, so I'll do a little tap dance show while we're waiting for him. Let me see. Poll tab. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So you can see the results of the polls just by going to the poll tab. And let's see. Looks like consensus is that ULD Care is pursuing the right ambitions. Doesn't seem like there's anyone who disagrees with that. Are you optimistic that ULD operations can be improved? I don't see actual percentages, but it looks to me like maybe 80-20. 80% think it can, 20% don't think it can. And lots of people willing to participate in a ULD Care working group in the future. So that's great. I am going to see if I can track down Urs myself here. Go. Okay, just give me a moment. I'm just going to turn off my mic and camera just for a second. Hi, Bob. Bob Rogers wondering if you could hit the join broadcast room button.
How's that?
Yep, I can hear you. Great, I can see you. We appear to have lost Urs, so I'm wondering if you might have any of his notes that he was going to talk about for the closing remarks.
I don't have any of his notes, but I can probably put something together on the fly. Is that the plan?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, it's been a long night for me. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. It's now my 4:45. I think the sun's going to be coming up shortly. Not sure I'll volunteer to do one of these again. But overall, I think this has been a very interesting few hours. And I think we've achieved everything that we could have hoped to have achieved. And I don't know, perhaps I do see the numbers have fallen off slightly in the last couple of hours. Perhaps we should give an award to the people who survived to the very end. But no, really, it's been a great event. And I mean, one of the things that I really think we just keep coming back to is the sustainability discussion. And I think, again, I can't say enough. I think we have got opportunities here to push this agenda. And but I also agree with what Fabio said, not to let's fight the battles we can win. Or was that Randy? I think that's Randy said that as well. But I mean, yeah, we've got to pick our battles. We've got to pick our fights. But and that's I think a very good takeaway. ULD Care does try to punch a bit above its weight. That's just because that's who we are. ULD are somewhat the underdogs in the air cargo world. So if we don't shout about them, nobody else is going to. But apart from that, Carl, I really wouldn't sort of have a great deal more to add. But I do know that one of the points that Urs was going to make, and I think you have one last poll, which is in regards to our plans, fingers crossed, to hold a face-to-face conference in Athens at sometime in September. We're currently scheduling to do this in conjunction with air cargo handling in Athens in early September. I seem to remember, Carl, there is a poll on that, just to ask people's opinion if they. Yeah, here we go. There you go. Basically, if people feel they would be favorable, or if they would be able to attend a face-to-face conference. So yes, thank you for that. Beyond that, with as you say, we seem to have lost Urs, but never mind. Maybe Costa Rica has drifted off into the Pacific. So I think what we can do is thank everybody, speakers, panelists, the organization team behind the scenes, and yeah, I think we can declare this. Here we go. I can see UW.
Yeah, I think it's Urs. I'm just waiting for him to unmute and turn on his camera.
Okay.
Well,
yes, no.
Urs, no camera or mic yet. Try again. I think you covered it pretty well, Bob. I think we got the last poll out. So
yeah. All right.
I'm seeing some progress with Urs now.
Nope. Little things are flashing. Maybe the Costa Rica tech didn't last the course.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, and I think we can officially declare the event closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.